Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Aaron Chamberlain. Aaron is the bicycle sales and marketing manager at Maxxis, and you might recognize this guy's voice because prior to that, Aaron was my co-host here on the Single Tracks Podcast. Thanks for joining us, Aaron.
Yeah, man, it's good to talk to you. I don't know if people out in Single Tracks land know or not, but we get to still ride together fairly often, and we both live in Decatur, Georgia. So
yeah,
get to see you on a regular basis, but it's been a minute since I've been on the podcast. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And like when we do see each other, yeah, I'm not asking you about tire stuff, or at least I try not to, but
no, you're usually like riding really fast down the paved sections in between trails, and I'm somewhere at the back wishing I had a cross country race bike.
Yeah, that's my New Year's resolution, is to be like back of the group. Like I'm tired of being at the front because I feel pressure at the front too, even though I know that there's plenty of people that are like, hey guys, slow it down. But if I'm at the front, man, I just feel like I have to go fast.
Yeah. And then you got Paul in your ear telling you you're going the wrong way. So
right. Exactly. Group dynamics.
Yeah.
So how are things in the world of bike tires? What have you been up to lately?
Things are good. It's been a crazy 3 years, 2+ years, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone else, we dealt with a lot of issues through COVID with product availability and
mm-hmm.
factories being backed up and overwhelmed, and shipping costs skyrocketing. But yeah, in the last few months, we've really started to see things smooth out, and it's looking up for 2023.
Yeah. You guys even managed recently to come out with a new mountain bike tire, or an update to the Forecaster. And so, yeah, has there been a lot of other like product development stuff or things that you're finally able to get to now that stuff's kind of back to normal?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of stuff in the works. Some of it has taken longer than expected because of, the issues I just mentioned. But
mm-hmm.
yeah, we're kind of back on track. The Forecaster was our big launch last year. We'll have a launch coming up at Sea Otter for some new stuff. And then we've got a couple other things in the pipeline, not necessarily all mountain bike, but
mm-hmm.
yeah, new stuff on the way for this year. So it'll kind of be more of a return to normal for us.
Yeah. Well, so talking about mountain bike tires, in the past there was a lot of change with like bike tire widths. And actually I was looking back, like one of the first podcasts we did, I don't even remember. I think you were here when we launched the podcast, right? And
yep. Yeah.
We talked to Bobby Brown when he was at Maxxis, like about plus tires. Like that's how long ago that was. And so clearly like fat and plus tire adoption, like that stuff has peaked, and, things are looking pretty stable in terms of widths. Is that fair to say, like at least on the mountain bike side? For
sure. A lot of that has to do with rim widths kind of stabilizing as well. We, along with the emergence of, well, I guess really what probably spurred the emergence of the mid-fat plus tires, whatever you want to call them,
mm-hmm.
was the availability of wider rims. And like a lot of things in the bike industry, maybe swung too far in one direction and had a little bit of a course correction. And now we're seeing rim widths settle kind of around that 30 to 35 millimeter internal width.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're designing basically all of our mountain bike tires for. The cross-country stuff, any new cross-country stuff is
mm-hmm.
kind of aimed closer to the 30 end of the spectrum, while the trail and all mountain enduro downhill stuff, whatever, the more gravity focused side of the range is going to be more towards 35. But yeah, that window of rim widths, that's what you're seeing on new bikes. That's what manufacturers are speccing on their tires or on their bikes. So we've really seen Honestly, I mean, we sell very few Plus tires any longer. We've discontinued quite a few from our line just because they weren't selling. I know people who love Plus tires are very vocal about it, but there's just the numbers aren't there. So we've seen really that 2.4 to 2.6 range be the bulk of the market by far, and really, I mean, 2.4, 2.5 are the most popular.
Yeah. So that's where I want to kind of zoom in, is that like 2.4 to 2.6 inch size. So looking at like the Minion, those are available in like a 2.3 and a 2.4. The Minion DHF is like a 2.5 or a 2.6. Like, does a 1/10 of an inch make a big difference to people? Like, are we at the point where we're like, okay, well now I got to decide, like, am I a 2.4 guy or am I a 2.5 guy?
Yeah, it really can, because it's not just the width. Whenever you're making a tire wider, you're also going to increase the sidewall height. So you're increasing the overall volume. So the difference between 2.4 and 2.6, while on paper just a 0.2, less than a quarter of an inch in width doesn't seem like that much. In actuality, the volume is a lot bigger. And you can see that if you mount up, a 2.4 and a 2.6 next to one another, you're going to see that visually at the same pressure, one's going to have a lot more volume than the other. And it also, when you're, dealing with a larger casing, like that also affects the knob layout, the design. Like, things have to get tweaked. Like, maybe the actual knobs on a 2.6 are going to be slightly larger than a 2.4 or something like that. So the differences are subtle, but they're there. Even for everyday riders like you and me, like, we can tell that difference. But on the upper, the World Cup racers, they like having the options of 2.4s, 2.5s, because they're very picky about their setups, and they can feel that difference in ride height, and that may be going from a 2.4 to a 2.5. Maybe for certain tracks they want a 2.5 front and rear. Maybe some tracks are running a 2.5 front, 2.4 rear. So the 2.3s, we don't. That's kind of a legacy size, I would say, at this point.
Okay,
that's what. 2.3 is kind of like the old 2.4. I would say that's what 10 years ago, quote unquote, like big, wide, aggressive tire was a 2.3. But as we've seen, bikes get more capable, trails and riders become more capable. Trails get more intense. The wider tires can really help there. Yeah,
I seem to remember too. I mean, wasn't that long ago you guys had like 2.35s and stuff, right? And I guess we would round that up to like 2.4. But you make a great point. Like, that's the answer, is math, right? Like, like you have to, when you're talking about volume, you're not tripling, you're cubing, right? So like, so like a small difference in width makes a huge difference in volume. And like you said, visually you can tell that. Like, you might not be able to tell, put the tires side by side, you can't tell that one's like wider than the other, but you look at them in profile and you're like, holy cow, like that's a big tire.
Yeah, and some of it's clearance too. That's why we offer kind of the range of sizes.
Right.
Even, like I said, things have settled down on the rim side of things and the rim widths, but most trail and enduro bikes these days can usually clear maybe a 2.5. I think, like, for instance, I have a Santa Cruz high tower, and I think their clearance is rated at 2.4 in the rear with that's the maximum width that they recommend. So that's part of it too, is like having that option for our OEM bike manufacturer partners, that they have tires from Maxxis that they can spec on their bikes and not worry about clearance.
Yeah, and I guess, like you're saying too, the width can affect like the knob layout and the sizes of them, and which in turn is going to affect the weight of the tire. And so again, like that 0.1 or 0.2 difference can actually be pretty big, and people want to have those options. Some people are looking to save weight, or they have different priorities in terms of what they're looking for. And so it is nice to have all those options.
Yeah, we know it can be a bit overwhelming with our line, and that's one of the things that I've been working on and pushing towards internally is just trying to simplify our line where we can, make it a little more streamlined for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's good. It's good for everybody, right? It's good for you guys in terms of supply. It's good for consumers. Maybe the only people are the racers who are going to have a problem with this. It sounds like,
yeah,
they're the ones that are like, I need a tire exactly like I want it. And so, yeah, you guys sometimes have to do that.
Yeah, racers are very picky, or some of them can be anyway.
Yeah. So do you think bike brands these days are doing a good job at speccing tires on bikes? Like, do you work with many of those type of folks and like, what are they looking for? Is it usually like weight and price, or are they starting to get better at looking at performance as well?
I would say it's maybe a little bit of a mixed bag right now. I do see, especially more on the e-bike side, I would say maybe seeing some tires that are kind of undergunned for the intended use. And I would prefer that they would maybe use something, a little more durable, a little more robust.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, it does come down to price. I mean, the bike manufacturer is trying to hit a certain price point. And, when you're talking about thousands upon thousands of bikes, even the wholesale cost on tires, like a couple bucks here or there really starts to add up when you're,
interesting.
When you're dealing with those kind of margins. So yeah, a lot of it is, some of it is price driven. I think some of it is, and maybe more in the European side, is like very weight driven.
Right.
I think maybe too, maybe in the US, like weight isn't as big of a concern overall. But for me, this is kind of more on the e-bike side. I mean, you already have a motor. Like, why not have a more durable tire that's going to give you a better riding experience? At least from my point of view, if you spend, I mean, what's an entry level e-bike these days? Like $6,000. If you spend $6,000 on an e-bike, and you go out and totally you bottom out your tires and you snake bite your front and rear tires, that consumer, that rider is not going to be mad at the product the product manager at the OE. They're going to be mad at Maxxis for
right. You're gonna be like, these Maxxis tires are crap. I'm not buying these anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So I think honestly, my view on the e-bike side of things is if you're on an e-bike, you should be running a dual ply tire, whether that's our double down, which is our enduro casing, is still a dual ply tire. We should either be running double down or downhill.
Okay.
That's my point of view.
Yeah, that's interesting because there is a lot of, I mean, I don't know if you guys are making e-bike specific stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's like there is a lot of parallel between e-bike specific and downhill, like just more aggressive, higher impact type tires. So yeah, that makes sense.
And there is, we are starting to see the prevalence of the kind of the lighter weight e-bikes starting to come out over the last year or so. And I think those are really cool. I think there's a lot of potential there. But yeah, you kind of have these like slightly different categories. How we like to divide everything up into in the bicycle industry, just slice things further and further up. But yeah, I mean, some of those e-bikes, it's pretty common for the full fat e-bikes, if you want to call them that, to weigh 50 pounds or more. And if you're riding around on a bike that already weighs 50 pounds before you even hop on it, and you're running exo casing, which is kind of our like base level of protection. If you're running that, like, I don't know, that seems to me like you're asking for it. You're asking for it. So yeah, if you're running a full on e-bike with a giant battery on it, yeah, 2-ply.
Yeah, that's good advice. And a lot of those, though, that makes me think, though, that a lot of those are plus tires still, right? Are you still seeing that, like that some of the e-bikes are being spec'd with plus? Is that like the big part of the market now?
No, we kind of heard that early on that that it was going to kind of be like how motorcycles are, how off-road motorcycles are, dirt bikes, where you have a smaller diameter rear wheel with a wider tread on it, and then you have larger diameter wheel in the front with a narrower tire. You see a little bit of that. You do see mullet. Obviously, mullet bikes are much more common, but we haven't really seen the demand for 2.8s, or even really. We do hear a little more for the 2.6, but it's mostly that 2.4 and 2.5 that the manufacturers want.
Yeah, that sounds like a mullet half plus, like where you've got like one plus tire, one regular tire, you got a big wheel and a little wheel. My goodness. But yeah, fortunately we haven't seen a lot of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, do you get like much opportunity? Do brands come to you when they're speccing a bike where they say like, hey, we've got this like light duty trail bike, like what kind of tire would you recommend? Or do most of them come to you like they already know what they want and kind of feel like they're the experts?
It's definitely a mix. You see it both ways for sure. And then sometimes we'll get approached by an OE. It stands for original equipment manufacturer. That's what OEM means. So that's just the bike brands. That's what we refer to them as. So sorry for the inside baseball language there.
Yeah.
But there are times where maybe an OE sees a hole in our line and they can approach us and they say, hey, we're working on this bike, but you don't offer the exact spec that we think is ideal for this bike. Would you be willing to build this tire for us?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Interesting.
And sometimes that could be, in rare instances, that would be an entirely new tread pattern. Typically, that's not what happens, but it could be a width that we don't offer, or a certain combination of spec. Like we want this width with this compound and this like protection. So
yeah. I mean, I just know too, like being someone who tests different bikes and stuff, that's always something that half the bikes I'm like, why in the world did they choose this tire? I've got opinions about like which tire they put on a bike and like, is it a good fit for the intention of the bike? Like, I'm sure that must drive you crazy, like just seeing all these bikes and like, you guys put the wrong tire on it.
Yeah, some of that can be geographic, right? So if a bike manufacturer is tied to a certain area, like they may have an idea of what tire works on that bike because of the trails near them, where maybe on the broader scope that might not be the best for all their customers.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it, that it's it could be more to it than just like there's the right tire for the bike, that it really does depend on the rider and where they're riding and all that stuff. And yeah, it's impossible to get what everybody needs.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that, I mean, I've seen Single Tracks mention it a lot, that tires are one of the easiest ways to change the performance of your bicycle. It's relatively inexpensive way to do it. And I mean, if you think about it, the tires are the only thing that's touching the ground on your bike, as long as everything's going the way it should be. So yeah, if you have, and that's a cool thing too. You can mix and match, and you can, tread up or tread down depending on what your goals are. I do that throughout the year, where in the winter, we get a ton of rain here and the ground is soft, and it can be, you can have any variety of conditions in Georgia in December. It could snow one week and then it could be 70 degrees the next week. So yeah, I tend to run a pretty aggressive knob tire, front and back. And then maybe in the summer when things are a little drier, the trails are running faster, everything's kind of baked by the sun, and the trail surface is like hard concrete, then I want something that's going to roll faster. So
yeah,
I can get away with something with a less aggressive tread.
Yeah, that's you read my mind. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Like, since you do have access to so many tires, I'm curious to know like how often you do change them up. It sounds like it's generally, depending on the season, but I mean, you could have like a really rainy week and then the trails are going to be wet for a while. And so, yeah, are you like switching to a more like wet conditions tire, or or is it, just more seasonal for you?
It's more seasonal. I used to be much more like that where, I'd just kind of nerd out a lot more. And yeah, like you said, if it's okay, it looks like rain this weekend or it's been raining the last week and I know the trails are going to be soft, I'm going to throw a set of shorties on,
Yeah. Or even by the trail, like would you say,
true,
okay, I'm going to ride at Blankets Creek and that's, lots of dirt and pretty soft. But then if I'm going to go to like Coldwater and ride Gaza, am I going to put like a different tire on that's good for rocks?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to do that, but now, I'm just more than anything, I'm just riding for fun. And I have basically a winter setup and a summer setup, more or less. And not doing a lot of swapping back and forth, unless something highly specific comes up. If I do, get a wild hair and decide I want to do a race, I'll change my setup. But yeah, typically it's minions front and rear in the winter. And then in the summer, I've really been digging the Minion DHF in the front and the Dissector in the rear.
Yeah.
It's kind of been my go-to combo.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's helpful because I'm guessing a lot of people, well, one, like we said, they're pretty overwhelmed at the number of choices that are out there. And so, like maybe focusing on an all-round tire, like that's not a bad choice, right? Like,
no, not at all.
Unless you're a racer or you really are into it where you're riding like winter, you're riding a lot in the winter, you're riding a lot in the summer where maybe you want different tires. But for most people, like all conditions tires can be a good choice, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's something else that goes along with that. That's kind of, you start to know how your bike's going to react, when you're very used to your setup and you're very comfortable with it. You can adjust your pressures up and down as need be for conditions. That's another thing that I would definitely encourage people to do is experiment with their tire pressure. Like if it's wet, drop a couple PSI, if it's dry and hard packed, add a couple PSI. It can make a really big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great advice. Right. It's not, there are so many different variables and, choosing the tire is one of them, but then, like you said, we have control over changing pressure every time. And I don't know, maybe is that the big one? Is there anything else we're missing? Like I need to wash my tires more. They get a lot of crud on them and like I don't grip as well if I don't wash them, but
yeah, tire pressure is huge. And I think all riders would do themselves a big favor by experimenting with tire pressure. Just a couple PSI in either direction can really change the dynamics of your bike, and for the good or worse, depending on, again, like where you are, what you're riding, what kind of bike you're on, your size. We do get those questions. People are like, hey, I live in Colorado. What tires should I run? And it's like, oh boy, we need a whole lot more information than that, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I would say experiment with your tire pressure. I think people probably tend to run probably too high of a pressure overall. Yeah. But obviously, there are, because it feels faster, at least on, if you're riding on the street or you're riding on really hard packed trails, like it can feel faster, but in reality it's not. The Nino Schurter method for checking your tire pressure is, drop it until you hit the rim and then like add a PSI. And that's, honestly, that's not a bad way to do it. But yeah, I would get a good gauge and use it. I would say, I mean, I check my tire pressure religiously essentially before every ride. Yeah. Maybe if I rode the night before and I'm doing a quick lunch ride or something the next day, I'm just trying to get out the door and go hammer out a couple trails for 45 minutes. I'm not, maybe I won't check it then, but if it's been a day or two, or, I'm going to go up in North Georgia and do a big ride, like I always check my tire pressure and your suspension, your pressures in your forks and shocks. That's one thing. I mean, it boggles my mind. I'll ask people, I'm like, when's the last time, you check your pressure and your shock, and they're like, huh? You're like, oh man. So never.
Yeah. And that's not even just like I squeezed my tire. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm surprised you don't have those like fancy valves that like, you just like tap your phone and it tells you what pressure you're running.
Yeah. I've got enough gadgets and gizmos in the rest of my life. I do try to keep the electronics off my bike as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, we just had Calvin Jones on the show, and he's jazzed about all these like, electronics, like specifically the ones that are monitoring your bike, right? Like from a repair perspective. And like you're saying, 1 or 2 PSI can make a big difference in how your bike rides. And so, yeah, I mean, that's something you need to know. And maybe a lot of us like that aren't checking, we go out and we're like, oh man, I'm having a bad day on the bike. But maybe that's just because your tire lost a couple PSI since the last time you rode it and you didn't check it.
Yeah, it feels really draggy and you just, it feels vague in the corners. And it could be, like you said, something as simple as your tire pressure. So get a good gauge, there's digital ones, there's analog ones, you can get a solid gauge for $20 or less. It's not a huge investment. I would say don't, unless you have some really high end pump, the gauge is probably super inaccurate. I know I have an old Joe Blow, and I mean it's a great pump. I've had it, I don't know, it's probably 15 years or something or longer. I got it when I first moved to Atlanta in 2006, so it's been a long time. Wow. and it still works, but I pump my tires up and it reads 30 PSI, and I check it with my gauge and it's 24. So
you know how to compensate.
Yeah. So don't trust your pump gauge unless I don't know if you have a Silka pump or something like that, some bespoke pump. Don't trust it.
Yeah. Double check. That's really good advice. Yeah. Cause what is it about those gauges? They are not very accurate. I know I've got one too. I feel like mine's under.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way it's that low. It feels like way more, but yeah, you got to get used to it. So another thing that's new since we've last talked is gravel tires. I mean, gravel riding has been around for a while, but obviously it's exploded and there's all kinds of gravel bikes and therefore there's all kinds of gravel tires. So thinking about this, like you're a mountain biker. So I'm curious to know, like, what are the mountain bike tire features that are a good fit for gravel? Like what kind of stuff from mountain biking do you see kind of working well for gravel that maybe wouldn't work well for road?
Well, one of the biggest things we've even seen this on the road side is just tire volume goes a long way. And I don't think a lot of people realize that either. They think if they're riding gravel that maybe they need some big aggressive knobs on the tread pattern, and you really don't. I mean, if you're riding a lot of loose gravel, a lot of chunky gravel, then that's when you want to start looking at some of the knobbier options out there. But if you're riding dirt roads or really kind of small gravel, like really crushed up small like pea gravel kind of stuff, tire volume will go a long way. You could get a slick, essentially a tire with no tread on it, no tread pattern, a 40 millimeter wide tire, and that may be all you need. Again, the tire volume and then running the correct pressure goes a really long way. But some of the features of gravel tires do kind of mimic those from the mountain bike side. We have the semi-slick option. That's the Receptor in our line, and most of the other tire brands out there have a competing option. And that's where you have a more smooth center tread and then a little bit of a side knob, and that's intended to be kind of a good all-around option where maybe more leaning towards like 30% off-road and like 70% like on-road or dirt road kind of thing. Yeah,
I've been testing one like that, like a semi-slick gravel tire, and it's great. I mean, especially for if you're going to hit any amount of single track where you're going to want those like cornering knobs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a great option for, for riders and, kind of maybe urban areas like us where the vast majority of your time is going to be spent on actual pavement, but you are going to take that little side trail that cuts through the park on the way home or, something like that. Or maybe, you do get out once a month and go do a gravel ride, but you're not trying to swap tires back and forth. A semi-slick's just a solid all around option for gravel.
Yeah.
And then from there you get into the Rambler, which is kind of our do-it-all. It's kind of like a 50-50 split between gravel and road. That's the most popular gravel tread that we offer. It's the one that most of our riders are using at the big events. It's what they're using at Unbound in Kansas. So that's kind of the do-it-all option. If your gravel bike is, it's more skewed towards gravel and not necessarily like an all road kind of bike.
Yeah. Interesting. Are you seeing are people looking for stronger sidewall protection and stuff like that? It seems like that's where, mountain biking, we've been kind of chasing that for a while. Everybody's realized, okay, like I want something with some pretty strong casings on them. Like, are people doing that in gravel as well, or is the weight penalty just too much?
No, you are seeing that on gravel, and that's another thing I was going to mention that we brought over from more from the mountain bike side was the EXO sidewall protection that we offer from our mountain line. That's something that we also applied to our gravel line. So just a little extra material in sidewall, especially if you're riding in areas with sharp gravel where you're possibly more prone to sidewall cuts, stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been noticing. I was like reading some reviews, customer reviews of some gravel tires, and it was like every third one, people were like, "Oh, these tires are crap." I got a flat, and it's like on the one hand, I don't know. I mean, they're gravel tires, right? So like you can't huck off of rocks and do a lot of the stuff you're used to doing on your mountain bike. Even though we've been kind of sold that, right? Like we watch the videos and we're like, "Oh, sweet, you can ride it really hard and ride it like a mountain bike," but like. There's a trade-off there because this is a gravel bike after all, and you want it to be fast and light and, all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. You have the obligatory annual video from some manufacturer where they have one of their top riders ripping a gravel bike down a line or something and whistling.
Yeah. And I mean, I like riding like that, right? I mean, if I could have a bike that could do all of that, like I'm going to try to do it, but yeah, at the same time, like, are they still gravel tires if we're designing them to stand up to that much abuse?
Yeah, we are. We are seeing kind of some, definitely some blurring of the lines between gravel and cross country. I think you've probably heard me rant about this, but I think gravel's great. I'm glad it's getting more people into riding. I really enjoy it personally. It's something I've always kind of done even before it was a thing, necessarily. We've got a lot of great gravel roads in North Georgia, and it's been almost comical to kind of watch the slow motion recreation of the cross country bike through gravel bikes, because we had cross bikes and then disc brakes. The move to disc brakes really opened up a lot of, gave a lot more flexibility to frame manufacturers and opened up tire clearance. So that really expanded the options there. Yeah. So, you get people like, "Oh, this bike is sweet, but, it'd be great, like a little more tire clearance." Be like, "Oh, this bike is sweet. It'd be great. Like maybe a fork." Yeah. Like, "Oh, a dropper this post. Fork is sweet." Yeah. A dropper post would be sweet. It'd also be sweet, like rear suspension. It's like, y'all, we already have this bike. We made this bike already. It's called a cross country bike. Like,
right. Except the drop bars, man. Like Yeah, as long as we keep that, I'm fine with adding all that other stuff. Cause like to me, it's just, it feels way different to be riding in drops than it does to be riding like a straight bar bike. And so, yeah, to me, I'll take all that stuff, man. And I will call it a gravel bike, or I'll call it a drop bar mountain bike. I don't know. Like, but to me, it feels just way different to be on a different set of bars.
Yeah. We've kind of hit a max, I would say, at like the 50 millimeter wide tire, but that's been you know, where things have gone. You know, initially we launched our gravel line in like 38, and everybody's like, whoa, like 38, that's a huge tire. Because kind of before that, in the drop bar world, kind of a 33, which is what a cyclocross tire, that was that the UCI mandated, that was the widest you could run on a cyclocross bike, was a 33. That was kind of like the biggest, knobbiest tire you could get. And then, you know, 38. And then it was like, okay, we need a little, so now we have 40s and then we have 45 and 50s. And then kind of if you're getting above that 50 end of the spectrum, that's when it kind of transitions over to our cross country tires. So, and we do see that, you know, there are frames that I would say more on the 650 side of things, 27.5.
Yeah.
You know, people being able to run a narrow mountain bike tire on their gravel bike.
Interesting.
And there's a handful of bikes out there that can fit like a 29, you know, 2.2 or something like that. But those are kind of the exception.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, what is 50 millimeters in inches? I mean, is that 2 or almost 2? I mean, it's, yeah, like you said, the next size up is mountain.
Yeah. I think it's just under 2 inches is the conversion.
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
It's essentially if you round it
1.96. So yeah, I mean, that used to be a common mountain bike tire width, was 1.95, right?
Right. Yeah. The old Panaracer, the Dart and the Smoke, and a 26 by 195.
Right. So yeah, people have options beyond 50, but they're just going to call it a mountain bike tire. It's going to be 29er instead of 700.
Exactly. And obviously we've got great options for the mountain bike side of things. So
yeah, for sure. Some people have mentioned that gravel tires are like, especially tubeless, are harder to install than mountain bike tires. Is there a reason for that? Like, is it because they're not as wide and so they're like, you don't have as much flexibility and like, you know, kind of rubber to work with, or something else going on then?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And generally, you know, there's just a lot. There's less material, and you know, the casing can be a little bit lighter weight, so it's just not. It's not as, even before it's mounted, it's like a little floppier, right? So it's like harder, especially if you're just using a floor pump. Yeah. It can be kind of a frustrating experience for sure, and I know that from my own experience, and that's why I asked for a compressor for Christmas last year and got one. So
nice.
That definitely helps. Yeah, don't typically need it for the mountain bike stuff, but yeah, for the gravel, a compressor can really help. So if you don't have one at home and you're struggling, you know, I'd recommend maybe taking a visit to your local shop and seeing if they can snap it on there for you real quick.
Yeah, that's good advice. And yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, most Maxxis tires, I don't need a compressor, and yeah, able to do a floor pump. And then the ones that you do, like, compressor is not even easy, right? Like, I've had so many that like even a compressor won't work. And so it's like, it's not you, it's them kind of thing. So I want to get down into the weeds a little bit here. You and I had a conversation over email about this number called threads per inch that a lot of, it's a spec that you'll see on a lot of tires when you're shopping. It's abbreviated TPI, threads per inch. So like generally, what does that number tell us? And like, what does the high TPI mean versus like a low TPI?
So TPI, that's, like you said, threads per inch. So that's if you take 1 square inch of the casing material and you counted the threads in it, you'd get to that number. So the main two casing materials that we use are 60 TPI and 120 TPI.
Okay.
That's on the bulk of our mountain line. We do on the road side of things. We do offer 170 TPI tires, and we do like some team issue only stuff in 170 TPI that's not available in the aftermarket. But basically, so if you think about, you have these two squares of fabric. One's a 60 TPI, one's a 120 TPI. Obviously, they're occupying the same space, right? You have 1 square inch of each. So to get 120 threads into the same square inch, those threads need to be half as small as the 60 TPI. So the individual
it's not like
threads,
a tighter weave. I assume maybe you could also do a tighter weave, but actually that's not it. It's the thread size is what you change. Correct.
Yeah. So the threads themselves, the individual threads are much finer. And what that does is it's lighter weight and it's a lot more flexible. So that if you had all else being equal, if you had a 60 TPI tire and a 120 TPI tire, the 120 TPI version is going to be lighter and it's going to conform to the terrain better.
Okay.
But the trade-off there is the main trade-off being durability. The 60 TPI, since those individual threads are twice as large, they're going to be more durable than those in that 120 TPI casing.
Yeah. Okay. So where we were discussing this over email was with a lot of tires now you have multiple layers of the casing, right? So how does that play into it? Like if you have 2 layers of 60 TPI or 2 layers of 120, like how do you then, I don't know, describe that? And it seems like too, the real problem is it's not consistent, right? Is that kind of the situation?
Yeah. So where it can get confusing is, are we talking layers? Or are we talking plies? And if the way a mountain bike tire is made is like, let's say you start with that single piece of 60 TPI casing, you add the beads in, and then you fold that layer of casing over those beads. So if you cut the tire apart, you'll actually see there's 1, 2, 3 layers of casing, but it's all that same piece of 100 or that same piece of 60 TPI casing. Right. Now, when we talk about plies, we're starting with, so when we say it's a dual ply tire, we're starting with 2 plies of that casing material from the get-go. So like for our downhill stuff, that's 2 layers of, or two plies of 60 TPI casing. So you add the beads, you fold that over, all of a sudden, instead of having the 3 layers of 60 TPI casing, you would have 6, if that makes sense, because you started again with the 2 pieces.
Yeah.
So that's where it can get, it can get a little,
some said we were going to get into the weeds here. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the manufacturers can kind of fudge that, and they'll call, they'll say that's their standard. What we say is our 60 TPI version. They'll call that 180 TPI. Right.
That's where it was confusing. And it's like, should be a really lightweight, like supple tire, but actually it's 60, which is the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. I know you've probably heard me say this, but my favorite way to describe it is it's like, it's like trying to take a $20 bill and you fold it in half and then you say you have $40. Like, no, you don't. You still
there you
have.
Go. That's easy. Yeah. Easy math.
Yeah.
Don't work.
So if you think about that way, like a dual ply tire, you would start with 2 $20 bills and then you'd start folding them. And then you'd start lying about how much money you had.
Right. So it's unfortunate because, I mean, for me as a product reviewer, like that number is helpful to understand like the intention of the tire and, kind of what to expect. But it's not consistent. So you kind of got to dig into that and look at it pretty closely.
Yeah. And like you said, looking at the weight can be a pretty good indicator. If you're like, whoa, this thing's 180 TPI, and also the intended use. If it's some big knobby trail tire and they say it's 180 TPI and you're like, that seems that seems a little maybe contrary to what you would think the intended use of such a high TPI casing would be. That could definitely be an indicator. And then, like you said, the weight, if it's, 1,000-gram tire, then it's probably not
right
180 TPI. It's a 60, and 60 is, that's pretty common. That's kind of like the default casing TPI count for most tire manufacturers.
Yeah. 120 is going to be more toward the XC end as far as mountain bike tires go, right?
Correct. And so, like I was saying, our downhill starts with 2 plies of that 60 TPI casing. Our double down, which is our enduro casing, that starts with 2 layers see, it's confusing. That starts with 2 plies of 120 TPI casing. Okay. And the idea behind that is, again, as we talked about, the higher TPI casing is going to be more supple. It's going to offer a different ride feel. It's going to conform to the terrain better. There's not a big difference in weight because there's some other things going on inside the dual ply tires. There's additional sidewall protection, that sort of thing. So there's not a big difference from us in terms of our double down to downhill, but the ride feel is what you're going to notice. And the double down is going to be more supple, where the downhill is going to be it's going to give you more damped ride quality, so more muted, which when you're, again, it's intended for downhill. You're smashing into things really fast. Like you want that muted feel. Whereas maybe that's not as desirable if you're riding enduro. And some of that comes down to, again, to personal preference, rider type, body weight, things like that.
Yeah. I'm thinking too now, like maybe it makes sense to divide by the number of plies to get the TPI, like the effective TPI, right? So if you got 2 plies of 60, then that's kind of 30. I don't know. At least that way the scale is like going the right direction, where you're like, okay, lower number means that it's going to be a stronger, more durable tire. Yeah.
You do see that in outside the bicycle market, but like in the automotive and power sports, you do see ply ratings. And what that essentially is it's saying this is equivalent to like an 8 ply, like it says, if this is an 8 ply rated tire, that's saying however that tire is constructed, regardless of how many actual plies are in there, it's as strong as an 8 ply tire. Whereas, because, adding plies, you're adding weight, that's adding, it's making things more rigid. It can impact the ride quality. So there is some of that. I don't know what the answer is, for mountain biking. I think, like how we do it, I think that's probably the best way to go. And we call that out in our, in our tech descriptions and stuff, that we do our TPIs based on, 1 ply of casing,
right?
One layer of casing. We're not counting those overlaps.
Yep. Makes sense. So talking about tires and how they're constructed and like all the different layers. Yeah. I mean, they seem like they're pretty simple things. It just seems like it's a big like block of rubber, but it's not. And one of the things that people are not sure about is like, how do you dispose of worn out bike tires? Is there like, what do you personally do? Because I'm sure you go through a lot of tires. Like, what do you do with yours? Throw them in the trash?
Well, in my particular instance, I'm able to take them to our office to dispose of them. Okay. We have what's called the Maxxis Tech Center. It's where some of our engineering team is. It's right across the street from us. And they're constantly testing tires and cutting tires up and all that kind of stuff. So we have basically, a dumpster essentially, where once it fills up, we call a company that takes them to wherever they take them. Honestly, I don't know what they're doing with them. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, we, via email, there's not a great answer right now. I wish I had better news for everyone out there, but it's really hard to recycle tires. And I would, as a first step, I would suggest reaching out to your local shop and seeing if it's anything that they offer. And beyond that, I know here in the Metro Atlanta area, we have Charm, which is the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, where you can take paint, you can take old computers, stuff like that. So maybe if you don't have a bike shop that offers something like that, then see if something a recycling center is available around you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like there are uses for recycled rubber and tires, right? I mean, you see like they can surface tracks or playgrounds and stuff, but yeah, it's not clear like where are they getting that stuff? Like, I would assume maybe with car tires, there's like an established kind of like, supply chain for that stuff.
There is. And anytime you go to get new tires, you'll see that disposal fee. If you go to your local shop and get a new set of tires on your car, part of that, if you look at the breakdown on your bill, almost always there's some sort of fee for disposal of the tires. Yeah. And there are some uses, like you said, you can surface tracks and playgrounds, but that there's a finite number of tracks and playgrounds that need surfaced. And trying to break a tire down back into its individual components, I mean, it takes a lot of chemicals, a lot of energy. It's a very involved process. So, like I said, it's one of those things that I'm sorry to say we don't have a better answer for right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny too because I just saw at the Consumer Electronics Show that Goodyear was, telling about some tire technology that they're testing, like using eco-friendly materials like soybean oil and pine tree resin to make the tires. But I mean, isn't rubber, it already comes from a plant, right? Like it's already a natural material. That's not the problem, is it?
Well, natural rubber is only a small component of the tire as a whole. There's a lot of other things that go into the tire. I mean, there's a lot of oil in there. You have,
and I'm sure theirs too. Like they're not just making it out of like pine tree sap. Like it's putting a bunch of stuff together and boom, like you can't recycle that anymore. Yeah,
it's definitely something we're aware of as a company as a whole. Beyond just bicycle, and there are things that we're looking to do and things we're looking to change. But yeah, it's this is unfortunately the spot we're in right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think too, like for folks who are concerned about that, like, I mean, the biggest thing seems to just be like choose tires that are going to last longer, right? So you don't need the stickiest rubber that you can get that's going to wear out after a season. Like, if you want to reduce your waste, then maybe think about like a longer lasting tire.
Yeah. Or offset it in other ways, maybe, ride more, walk more, whatever it is.
Yeah. So last question I want to ask you is about trends that you're seeing. And we talked about the pro riders and like how they kind of have a different view of tires and like how they use them. Are you seeing things that pro riders are asking for that like maybe aren't in the mainstream market yet, but maybe we will see soon?
Yeah, possibly. Like I mentioned, we have a launch coming up at Sea Otter. That's in April. That we're really excited about that. So some new things more on the tech side coming there. We do get, like I mentioned, we make 170 TPI versions of some of our mountain bike tires for our top race teams. So this is your Kate Courtney's, your Nino Schurters of the world. But they're harder to make. They're kind of prohibitively expensive, and to be honest, they're less durable because, again, going back to our TPI conversation, the higher thread count means those individual threads are smaller. Smaller threads means relatively lower durability. It's not like these things are just going to disintegrate, but they're more of a race day only kind of thing. And when you're going for your 10th world championship, all those things, all those marginal gains, like that's what it's about at that level, is marginal gains. So we haven't really seen a good, I hate to say it, like business case for making those tires available in the aftermarket, because up until we offered the 170 TPI stuff, I mean, our riders were kicking ass on the 120 as well. So for even elite level athletes, 120 TPI is an excellent option. Then on the downhill side, we have seen in the last couple years, really, probably last 4 or 5 years, the tracks have just gotten even more insane than they were. People are going faster than ever before. And we have started offering, modified versions of our downhill construction to our teams, where previously that just wasn't something that was needed before, where, you or I could go into a shop and buy the same tire that, Greg Menard is running on his bike. Whereas now, we are adding it's a material we call ZK, and it's actually borrowed from our road line. ZK is it's like probably the lightest, I believe it is the lightest puncture protection that we offer. So it's a really durable material, really light, but it's really expensive. It's really hard to work with. So that's why at this point it's like a team only thing. And you'll see that. You've probably seen spy shots from the races of riders on our prototype tires. There'll often be a test pilot badge on the side of the tires, and that means that they could be testing a new construction or a new compound or something like that. But is that though, what's driving people wanting to use ZK? Like, is it because it's lighter, or is it because it's better protection? Like, what's the problem they're trying to solve? Like fewer flats? Yeah. So we're using the ZK.
So it's stronger.
It's stronger. Correct.
Yeah,
so we're using that
stronger and lighter.
Yes. And it's lighter than other options that we have currently, like other puncture protection materials. So it's actually, you're adding material to the downhill tire. So a downhill tire with ZK, and it is going to be heavier than our standard downhill tire. But it's the lightest material we have currently that we could add puncture protection. And that's used as a breaker. And a breaker is a layer of material directly underneath the tread. So basically you have kind of 3 options for tire protection that you can do. You could have sidewall protection. That's like our EXO. You can have a breaker, which is under tread, like I just mentioned, like the ZK, or you could add a layer from bead to bead. So, we haven't seen the need or the request to, for like more bead to bead, because again, if you're adding stuff to the sidewall, that's going to impact like the damping of the tire. It's going to impact the ride feel. And that, again, that's not always something that's desirable. So if you add a breaker just to the top of the tire, especially something as like light and flexible as ZK, like you're not impacting ride quality nearly as much as you would be if you're adding stuff to the sidewalls. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And, this flats and puncture protection, that's definitely something that, regular riders and the pros alike are both going to want, right? Like sometimes, like you said, sometimes the pros have needs that regular people don't. But yeah, I mean, everybody I talk to is just like, I will do whatever it takes to get fewer flats. Like I'll run a heavier tire, I'll pay more, I'll, do a long list of things. So yeah.
Yeah. And along those lines, yes, if you're but going back to our discussion earlier on tire pressure, if you're getting a lot of flats, that's where I would start. Is number one is your tire pressure.
More pressure.
More pressure. Yeah. It's gonna protect your tires. It's gonna protect your wheels. And then if you're still having issues, because there is a certain point where you reach diminishing returns, where if you're having to pump your tires up to 35 psi and you're getting bounced all over the trail, like that's not an enjoyable ride for you. So
right,
maybe at that point, I would suggest stepping up to the next level of casing durability, whether that's from us or the competition, whatever. Obviously, I would prefer if you ran Maxxis tires, but
yeah, you'll be much happier.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're on EXO tires and you're having issues with it, and you've played with your tire pressure and you can't find a happy spot, then try our EXO Plus. And from there we have double down and then downhill above that. So
yeah, that's a good point. Right. You're figuring out, like Nino says, you're figuring out what you can get away with. You don't want to start at the very top and just be like, I'm going to get this because I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, you're probably missing out on like ride feel and some of the other things that, you could have if on a much lighter tire.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to mix and match either. I would say I think, find some wood to knock on real quick, but front flats are typically a lot less common than rear flats, right? So I think most riders can get away with running a lighter casing tire on the front and then running, a more durable tire on the rear. So maybe
that's great advice.
Yeah, maybe start there. If you're like, I don't feel like you have to run, double down or downhill tires front and rear, like. Maybe you can run a step or two below in the front and be all right. Like I can, even though I'm a bigger guy, I can get away with running, unless I'm just, if I'm going, on a trip somewhere and I want to be absolutely sure I'm not going to have issues, then I'll run something more durable. But for around here, like I can get away with running an EXO tire in the front and then like an EXO Plus or a double down in the rear.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I feel like maybe I'm just self-conscious, but I feel like there's tire shaming out there, right? People are like, what pressure are you running? And no matter what you say, they're like, that's too high. And then also same with the casing, I like the EXO tires. Those work for me generally. And people are like, oh no, you must not be riding hard enough or whatever. I feel like your ride style has something to do with it too, right? Like some people, just looking at them, watching them, and we're not talking about pros, talking about just regular riders.
Yeah.
Some people, like, they're hard on their tires.
Absolutely.
They could be going the same speed as the other guy, but, some people are just smashing, whereas other people are kind of floating.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people learn from that. I had to personally. I used to just absolutely destroy tires and wheels back in the day. I think it was also, this is 20 years ago. So I think tire technology's come a long way. Tubeless technology's obviously come a really long way. It's been really helpful in that regard. But yeah, for me, being like a broke college kid at the time, it was just a matter of like, you got to learn how to ride smoother or you're not going to be doing this much longer because I can't afford to keep replacing these rims, So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, riding style is huge for sure. Like your technique, your body position.
Yeah, you got to lift up that rear wheel a lot of times, right? I mean, you can't just smash into stuff because you're gonna get a flat.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, cool. Well, yeah, this has been awesome. Covered a lot of stuff that I was like, seems obvious, but I think a lot of people need to hear it. So. Thanks. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. And hope people found the information useful.
Yeah. Well, you can check out some of the tires that Aaron was talking about and some of the tire tech as well that Maxxis uses on their website, maxxis.com, and look for the bike section because they make other tires too.
Yeah. I would also just throw in there, follow us on social media. We do have a dedicated Maxxis bike Instagram account, and we're always there posting updates about all our teams and athletes and what they're up to, and it's a good place to reach out to us. Either slide into those DMs or comment on something if you have a question. But here to help if anybody needs anything.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great resource. Well, that's all I've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.